welcome to ISE Show TV. This is the latest panel debate. We are looking at room correction systems today, and I have with me here Peter Eilert from Home Theatre Environment. Hiya, how are you?
Amy, good to be here.
Good to have you here, thank you. We have Rob Sinden from Gecko Home Cinemas.
Hello.
Welcome. And Anthony Gramani there at the end, founder of Gramani Systems. Thank you so much for being here today. So, room correction systems, big topic.
Yes. Huge.
Do they work?
Yes. Of course they do. But I think it's a different conversation to having do they work to what are the differences between them. Because it's almost like lumping every single car into the same bucket and saying, is this the suitable car for this particular application? So I would argue that it doesn't matter how good the acoustics are in a room, you still need the icing on the cake with some kind of EQ. What EQ that is has to be appropriate to the experience of the integrator and also to what you want to achieve with the room. But yeah, they work.
Okay. What sort of approach do you take to room correction systems, Rob?
For me, what I'm typically looking at is what's the weakest link in the system, what's going to go wrong. And I'm used to working typically in the UK, and most of the time I'm looking at cinema rooms that are, I would say, the size of a double or triple garage.
Yep. And
they're very often in basements or loft spaces, and they're carpeted, and it's hard solid walls, and they have sofas, etc. in them. And by experience, you go in and you know the acoustics are okay. We can chat to each other comfortably.
Yeah.
It's not too live. It's not too echoey. And so, I would say if we can speak comfortably in a room, we can create good sound in that space.
Yeah.
And some rooms, you know, I've done projects in Greece and in Spain, and you get there and the construction of the walls are very different, and it's very live, very echoey. And in that environment, I think there's nothing you can do but put room treatment in that will give good sound.
Yeah.
But in my experience in the UK, very often rooms will have perfectly good acoustics in the first place. So, you know, it's a very complex subject. We could probably all talk about it for a very long time.
Yeah.
And we're trying to distill this down to 15 minutes. So we all have, I'm sure, slightly different takes on it. But my point, if you like, is most rooms I see in the UK are perfectly capable of reproducing good sound.
Yeah.
And if you take a very good speaker and you put it in a room, the main thing that goes wrong is the frequency response.
Yeah.
You get big peaks and troughs, and you cannot fix that with room treatment, and you can fix that with room correction.
Okay.
So that's kind of my starting point, which is a bit probably slightly different from the other two.
Yeah. Anthony, what's your opinion on room correction systems?
My opinion is you really can't have good sound if you do some level of what is now known as room correction. I heard Peter use the word EQ.
Yeah.
The words have been morphing around to make it sound more pleasant.
Yeah.
But the reality is just like was just said here, you take a perfectly good speaker and you put it in a room, any room, and it is going to have errors in frequency response, which is that some sounds are going to be louder than others, usually in the bass regions. So if you take a really good speaker and you know its measurements and you go, oh, here's my perfect speaker, you put it in a room and you measure it or you listen to it.
Yeah.
You actually know what to listen for, and I'll mention in a second different ways you can hear it. The sounds will go up. So for the camera, where this is high frequency and that's low frequency, the low bass, you may have good mids and highs, especially in a room that's got some kind of naturally treated acoustics, whether there are things you put on the wall on purpose or just what's naturally there. So everything could be fine, and then at low frequency it kind of goes up and down depending on the room. And you take the same speaker, you put it in another room, and it's going to have different errors up and down. So the way you can tell is you listen to the speaker, it sounds okay, but it's not great.
Right.
And then, so now what do? So you can actually get one of these things. Most people have these phones, and you can download a little application, and you can even get a little microphone for $50 or $60 or euros, and you can actually put sounds into the speaker and look at how wrong they are.
Yeah.
And it's better to do it with a really good analysis microphone, measurement devices, and computers, but without spending tens of thousands of dollars or euros like you used to have in the past, you can actually get a tool with some downloads you can get on the internet and figure out how wrong it is. I've actually worked on some studios where the engineer in the studio just goes, well, let me hear it. And they go to a piano synthesizer keyboard and go, and then half note by half note, they can actually hear what sounds are peaking and dipping. And if you actually look at that objectively, which is tools, you can actually replicate exactly how the sounds of that synthesizer is going up and out. It is all very audible.
Okay.
There are people who go, well, just because you can see it on a computer doesn't mean it's audible. Wrong.
Yeah.
If the microphone is good and the computer is doing a good job, you can actually hear it. So the bottom line is every room is going to take a perfectly good speaker and coerce it into being pretty sucky in the lower frequencies.
Yeah.
And so then the next question is, what do you do to fix that?
Yeah.
And I like to look at it as a number of different things. It's actually 4 or 5 different resources you can apply, depending on whether there's budget for this, interior design allocation for that, architecture allowances for this or that, beliefs. People go, oh no, you can't do that. That's not going to work. Then you have to work within their religion. So there's a number of different things, and I find that a combination of the right acoustical solutions, whether they're actually purpose-made materials or things that look like furniture that you maybe design into it the right way, together with equalization. And I like a combination of kind of automatic, so robotically done, and manual equalization, where you let the robot do the first part that's really pretty dull and boring, which is measure correct, and then by using tools and listening to program material, listening to movies and film and music, you can actually, I would say, finesse it or override it. And then maybe you can move seats around, maybe if you have the possibility of moving speakers around, which doesn't always happen in a custom integrated space, but if you can move things around, you can reduce those errors. You'll never get it perfect.
Yeah, okay.
Perfection doesn't exist in this. What you're trying to do is to get rid of the big errors that make it very audibly wrong.
Exactly, yeah.
I think the interesting thing about audio as opposed to video is that in the video world there are absolutes, and you can make video perfect. If someone says DCI P3 color space, D65 and a certain delta E on the grayscale tracking, you can do that and you can show them measurements. This is objectively perfect. In the audio world, I'm going to make a car analogy. What's better, an Audi, a BMW or a Mercedes? They're all incredibly well engineered vehicles, but each one of those manufacturers has taken a balance of compromises. So Anthony was talking about manually doing it after the auto thing has happened. If we 3 manually EQ'd a room, they'd probably sound completely different. Which one would be best?
It's down to personal opinion, right?
Who knows? So there's engineering and there's science, but there's also our interpretation of what that sound should be like. Because the whole concept of accurate just doesn't really exist. Which point in that production process do you consider accurate? So reproducing it, very, very difficult.
Well, one of the problems I think with audio and acoustics is people very quickly get lost on it. And they don't understand it, think it's too much, or they see graphs and they don't understand it. My point is that if you get a very good audio system, very good stereo, put it in a room, there are very obvious problems with the bass that anyone will hear. When you can hear it, those corrected or not, anyone can hear it. And I do not think room treatment can fix that effectively. I found no evidence to support that. I've tried it a lot. Electronically, I can.
Okay.
So that is my contention. Is there are things which I think you think matter of opinion. There are very obvious problems in the bass in most rooms. You can measure it, and it's a high resolution problem. You've got very high peaks and troughs, and putting a certain type of absorber or Helmholtz trap or whatever, to me, you cannot effectively correct that with that. You can treat the higher frequencies fine, but in the low frequencies there's still a very obvious problem. And this is why I'm such an advocate of room correction systems. Vary a lot, there's big differences, but you can the simple point of, again with video, you draw the analogy, we would measure it. We would have a tool to measure it. And the measurement of that would be better than your eyes or my eyes. With audio, measure it, analyze it with a computer and correct it electronically. Trying to put foam or a trap on the wall with this it's madness. We've got 20,000 different wavelengths, and we've got 2 or 3 different types of material. To think you can correct one with the other, it's not logical. And now you can. There are the tools available to do it electronically.
Yeah.
And the problem is that most people are entrenched with a certain way of doing things. With technology, I'm awful, but it's a very complicated problem, and you can do things in the digital domain and analyze it, and you can see the before and after results. If you incorporate that into the design of your stereo home cinema, a lot of the other things that are suggested that you need to do, you don't need to, because the frequency response, which is the biggest problem, is already pretty much fixed for you.
Okay.
I wish we had longer. I wish we had longer, because I'm going to fundamentally disagree with you in terms of there's nothing you can put in the room that will help the bass. I agree.
No, you can help it.
You can't do that and turn it into that. That just defies the laws of physics. But there are things you can do to turn that into that, to then give the electronic side a better chance of working. And my philosophy is do as much as you can and completely accept in many rooms there's little you can do just because of the interior design, but do as much as you can in the physical domain and then let the EQ be the icing on the cake.
Why, if you're getting a very good room together and you've got a room, say, double size, double, triple garage, and you might want to fix this bass, and you might spend 20, 30, 40 grand doing that, why, when you can fix it electronically for a fraction of the price, more accurately, would you not do that? So this is the other thing. I think the problem is most people talking about acoustics have a vested interest. You know, I sell a room correction system. I have a vested interest, and you know, Tony creates amazing speakers and does room design. Peter works for a home treatment company, and my evidence of what I do is I say, look, I've got 8 different systems at my place that you're free to come and hear. 7 of which are in untreated room, each of which gives amazing bass response evenly with no room treatment at all. So that's the best evidence I have of this. And then the other basic principle of my business is I say, this system costs this much, go and try and find that elsewhere, that money. And if you start putting room treatment in for bass, you cannot do that competitively. It's too expensive to do this in the bass department. And again, I said previously, what I would love to do on a follow-up, if you're prepared to do, is let's hire 2 identical bedrooms in a hotel, and we put 2 systems in there. You try your approach, I try my approach. We let people listen to both of them and compare the cost of them. And if you're prepared to do that, I'm all over it.
Sure.
That'd be really interesting.
That would be an interesting follow-up.
It would be really good. But are there any limitations to room correction systems?
Yes, it can't fix an overly live room. If this is echoey, you can't do that electronically.
So would room treatment?
Yes, absolutely. In that environment, you absolutely must have treatment.
Yeah.
So I have a few things to say about all of this. So first of all, if you have, if you're lucky enough to work on a room from architectural point up, where the beginning of it is just a piece of paper that the architect has drawn up, you can actually design the wall structures and adjust everything so that the bass starts off being relatively damped and you have less standing waves. So depending on what region of bass you're talking about, the one that's most obvious to most people is this region, let's say from 80 hertz on down, where when things are really bad, you could have a condition where at that seat position there's no bass, and at this position it's extremely loud. Those are called standing waves, there's peaks and dips. And you can actually build a room where it's terrible, and that would be concrete walls all the way around, or you can build a room in which the walls are sized and adjusted and damped enough, because it's actually soft surfaces, where those resonances are absorbed, and then the room correction process doesn't have to work as hard. That's sort of what Peter's saying. So it kind of depends on what you're starting from.
Right.
The other thing is, I've had the fortune or misfortune to have to go and do room correction on a room where there was no choice of putting anything acoustical inside. Why? Because it's a beautiful top penthouse and there's a beautiful view on the city, and there's no way you're going to put anything.
Yeah.
And you start with a set of speakers, it sounds god-awful because there's 3 seconds of reverb time. And lo and behold, much to my surprise, after doing some things with equalizers, it actually didn't sound too bad. So, and this is from a person who actually makes and sells acoustical material. So I will admit that if you have no other choice than to do something to tailor the frequency response to correct the errors, then it gets better. And if you actually go into the science of it, when a room has 3 seconds of reverb time, there are some frequencies that are lasting longer that really screw up the sound. You can tape those down in the amplitude domain, which is what we're talking about, or an impulse response. You can make it sound acceptable. Not perfect, but acceptable. And I'm going to come back to in the ideal world, you want to be able to have all of the tools available to you, which is from the room construction, through the acoustical treatments, and of course, absolutely through the room correction scheme.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different ways to do the room correction, but once you apply all of those, including where you're putting the speakers and putting the seats, if you can do all of that, you can end up with actually very, very close to the audio equivalent of a perfect color space.
Yeah.
Again, the simple thing is that, Tony, a room with a 3-second reverb time is awful. It's just dreadful. And I work in normal UK homes most of the time, and we have carpet and we have sofas in there, and I've never been in a room with 3-second reverb time. So it's you know, it's like you're trying to paint a picture with the rain pouring on you. It's awful. So yeah, if you have an absolutely atrocious room, then pretty much every room that I go into, the reverb time is naturally between about 0.3 and 0.6 anyway.
Yeah.
So the starting point is fine. If it's echoey, if it's an obvious flutter echo, you must have treatment.
Yeah.
What I object to and I disagree with is the way room treatment is typically sold to people in the UK is the problem is the room and the answer to everything is room treatment, and I completely disagree with that. The other thing is, part of the reason what I'm saying, what I'm saying is disruptive and it's against what most other people in the industry do.
Yeah.
The reason I say this is because a perfectly built room, all I said, I did it 15 years ago with one of the best acoustic design companies in the world. I built an absolutely perfect room, blank sheet of paper, any height, any width, any angle, any material, funny shaped walls, just all that stuff, built it, put it in. It sounded awful.
Yeah.
So this is why I'm so I've tried it and it doesn't work. And again, most of the room treatment designs I see, I tried that approach 20 years ago in another room. And a speaker designer said, you don't want to hear these reflections. I built a room. It sounded awful. I've tried the approach that most people are taking. I've had the luxury of having a purpose-built room, one of the best acoustic firms in the world, who incidentally have since gone bust.
Right.
And two of the things I liked about them is they were genuine acousticians. They did a lot of work in studios, etc. And the other thing I liked about them is they didn't sell anything.
Right.
They sold the design. Because if your business is selling treatment for the wall, what's the solution for better sound? It's more treatment for the wall.
Yeah.
And my over-treated rooms screw up good audio systems.
Okay.
Some rooms must have some treatment, but the suggestion that in a normal UK room, the carpets, etc., it is a necessity for good audio, I think is completely incorrect.
Okay.
Floyd, the wonderful Dr. Floyd Toole called what you're discussing the acoustic treatments of life. And every material, me, my fat belly, is an acoustic treatment. It has an acoustical effect. So yeah, Rob is absolutely right. If you have a normally furnished living room, you're already in a really, really good starting point.
Yeah.
If, however, you're given a concrete bunker to turn into a cinema and to preserve image fidelity, so you don't want any distractions on the walls, you want flat black walls, you want it basically a dark cave that when you turn the lights on it still looks pretty. In that kind of room, when you don't want the acoustic treatments of life and you're starting with a base of 6 surfaces of concrete, then you have to treat it as an engineering exercise and use some kind of acoustic materials to do the things that the acoustic treatments of life would be doing in just a normally furnished.
My bread and butter, my business, is I show people systems, dealers install them, and often I'll go out and calibrate for them.
Yeah.
And last year I calibrated about 20 systems. It's quite quick and easy the way it's done. And there were 2 systems that I helped design and recommend, and they really didn't sound good. I didn't like them. And they were ones where the client would go, well, I thought I'd do this, and they put treatment in.
Yeah.
And they had screwed up the systems that I'd recommended because the system became lifeless and dull. And it's a complex area, and the solutions that are typically given, certainly I see in the UK, are, well, we'll put treatment everywhere and then it will sound great. And treatment everywhere will screw up the sound. So it is a heavy-handed approach that overpromises.
Yeah.
And I object to it if that then screws up the audio systems that I've recommended. That's my concern. I want what I demonstrate and what I install to sound the same. And if something is getting in the way of that and it's costing a lot of money, then I'm going to keep waving the flag at it.
Okay.
All right. So the treatment, like we were talking about outside, you ultimately don't, in any given room, about the sizes of residential spaces we're talking about, anytime somebody comes up and tells you to put more than about 10 or 15% of surface coverage of absorption, you should say, watch out. So that's all you need, is to damp the sound reflections by about 10 or 15%. It's also nice to have some scattering devices called diffusers. They really are scattering things that the remaining 85%, you scatter that a little bit and you take care of some of the low frequency absorption. That's all that you need. It's actually kind of like in cooking, you don't put too much salt. You put just the right amount of pepper, and everything turns out fine. So it's like everything else. You have to be judicious about how much you're using.
Yeah.
I completely agree. I looked at your website the other day. I thought I better check it out.
It's still up, huh?
I had training from Tony 20 years ago in the States, and I was like, oh God, science, wow, I love it, and he designed a room for speaker manufacturer and it sounded terrific. And I completely agree what you're saying there, 10-15%, I get that. And the danger is that people think the room is the problem, the solution is acoustics, and more is better. And I would say, for instance, with your approach, you might say, 15% treatment. You put 25% treatment, it starts getting worse.
Yeah. Okay.
So it's this understanding that more is better, and it's not. You've got, as you say, judiciously, you've got to use it.
Unfortunately, we have overrun, so we're going to have to hold it there.
Okay.
But I know this topic is huge, but I think we're going to have a big follow-up on this.
Definitely.
So that would be really good to get you involved in that. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you very much for joining us here at ISE.